As Serena mentioned, my name is Thomas Mäder. I run my own software consultancy called Castle Software in the Theia space, and I'm one of the project leads of Eclipse Theia. I will talk about Theia IDE, what it is, why we're building it, and where it fits in the world of IDEs. So, oops, sorry, missing the focus. So we always have to disambiguate a bit between Theia IDE versus the Theia framework, because Theia is both, right? So on one hand, Theia is a framework that adopters and ISVs can use to produce their own custom IDE products. And they market, support, and distribute those products to their own customers. And often the products are white labeled, so it doesn't say Theia on the label. And for some products, we don't even know that they're out there. For example, the guys from Texas Instruments yesterday, for a long time, we didn't know they did anything with Theia. So it's great to see them on the record here. On the other hand, Theia IDE is an IDE product for end users. It's distributed, marketed, and supported by the Theia community itself. And you can download and you can use it today. Let's do a quick walk down memory lane. And the whole thing of Theia, the story of Theia IDE begins in 2013 when Microsoft releases the Visual Studio Online, aka Monaco, out of which came 2 years later Visual Studio Code. And the Theia project really started as an alternative web version of VS Code. And the good folks at TheiaCon used it to create Gitpod, Red Hat, and a couple of folks there started Eclipse J. And that's basically online workspaces where you have a developer workspace in the cloud, and you need an IDE that you can run in the browser to work in that workspace. But there's also, people started doing a lot of special purpose, mostly desktop IDE products based on the Theia framework. We've seen the last 2 days examples from Samsung and also from Texas Instruments, right? And in 2023, we started a self-hosting effort. So the idea was that we would be using Theia to develop Theia itself. And we made it official in 2024 when we released the GA version of what's now called Theia IDE. Quick look at the IDE market. I think you've seen this graph before. So this is also from the Stack Overflow Developer Survey 2024. So 75% of people say they use VS Code in their work. Second is Visual Studio, still Microsoft at 29. IntelliJ, Eclipse at 10. VS Codium, the open source build of VS Code is at 5%, and Theia doesn't show up yet because this is a 2024 survey. We hope this looks different next year. So with VS Code being entrenched and this being pretty much a mature market, why would we go and make another IDE, right? Turns out there are a couple of reasons. The first is that we want to improve Theia, the framework, by being our own adopter. One example for this is on Linux, we have a problem when you download the Theia and you start it doesn't work out of the box. And normally, if we just did the framework, we would never notice that. We would have to listen to our adopters and they would tell us that it doesn't work. So it's much better if we just see these problems ourselves. The second idea was to reduce the bug count through daily use. And you all know that if you use something yourself, you know which bugs are really important and which ones you need to fix first. But we also wanted to provide the adopters with a drop-in replacement for VS Code, because not everyone needs a specialized version of Theia to use in their product. For example, Gitpod, they just need a general purpose IDE that runs in the browser, right? And another idea was to popularize Theia. As you've seen, the adopters, they usually white label their products, so people don't know that there's Theia underneath. So if we actually give people the opportunity to download the product based on Theia and use it themselves, they can familiarize themselves with the framework and also gain confidence that this is actually a real good product. And last but not least, we wanted to provide a fully open source Visual Studio alternative, because you've seen those 5% of the market that want to use VS Code, but they're not. And we would like to give them an alternative. So with that, what goes into Theia IDE? And there are a couple of things. First of all, the full Theia framework. Every feature that we build is in the Theia IDE, including Theia AI, etc., etc. Then we add the VS Code built-ins, minus a couple which are Microsoft specific, like Microsoft Authentication. And we actually built those for everybody. We released the VS Code built-ins into OpenVSX, so other products can use them from there. Then we add Java development tools because they are quite popular. And there are also 3 Theia extensions. And when I say Theia extensions, they're compile time extensions, right? Versus VS Code extensions, which are runtime. One of them is a launcher that lets you use Theia as a command line tool, for example, to open files, etc. The second one is some branding, which is done as a Theia extension as well. And the third one is an updater component that reads from our update site basically and tells people when there's a new update, and then you could just click a button and it will be installed and you can use the new version. Now that we know what goes into it, what does come out of it? So the artifacts we're building are basically a couple of installers. We use NSys on Windows. We build a DNG on the Mac, and there's also a Debian package. And these are signed by the Eclipse Foundation. We also produce for Linux an app image and the .zip file for Mac. And somebody was kind enough to contribute some code to get us into the Snap Store. At this point, shout out to Matthias Mailänder, who did the technical work on that. And for the web version of Theia, we built a Docker image, which we push to the GitHub container registry. In the future, it would be nice to be in the Windows Store, for example, or also, of course, the App Store on Mac, and maybe have a Red Hat or Debian official package. And we could use some help with that. So if you're familiar with how that works, hit us up. So now we know what we produce, but how do we produce it? And the process is that we do monthly releases, and they're always happening right after the release of the Theia framework. So right now we're at 1.55.0. And we have someone who builds all the artifacts and pushes them to a preview channel, which you can set up in the settings. So if you're on the preview channel, you get the preview releases. And then a bunch of community testers, which everyone can join. There's usually a message to the mailing list and a discussion on GitHub about that every month. And the community testers use the IDE for a couple of days for their daily work. And if we discover any bugs which we consider blockers for the release, we fix them and we make a new Theia framework release, for example, 155.1. And we go on doing that until we're happy with the quality. And that time we push a button and the preview release, the last one, is promoted to the stable channel, which then pops up a message for everyone who's using Theia IDE that there's a new release and they can click the button and they will get the new version. I'd like to mention the versioning scheme because it's kind of interesting, because the first release, for example, for 155.1 of the framework will be called 155.0. But if we have to rebuild one, so the framework, so we have 155.1, the corresponding Theia IDE release will be 155.100. Why do we do that? Because sometimes we need to do rebuilds even when we don't make a new version of the Theia framework. So if we have to do a bug fix release that has nothing to do with the Theia framework, it would be 155.11 or something, right? Or 101, 102. So let's have a quick look at what actually makes up the Theia IDE from a code perspective. You should be able to see my IDE now. And this is actually the source code that we use to build Theia IDE. And it looks like a pretty standard Theia application, Theia-based application. We have an applications folder where we have 2 different applications, Electron and the browser version. We have a couple of Theia extensions which go into this product. The launcher, as I said, the product is the branding, and the updater is obviously the updater. There's a couple of resources here, right? Nothing special. We have in the Electron folder here, we have an Electron builder YAML file. which describes how Electron Builder, which we use for building our artifacts, is creating for example, the installer, right? So this is Windows, we have a target NSYS, how we publish it, etc. There are a couple of scripts in here also that we use for signing the artifacts, etc. Also resources like entitlement plist. People familiar with programming on the Mac will be familiar with that. All right, what else? There's a Docker file that we use to build the web version of Theia IDE, but also a Jenkins file. And this is used to create our installers, etc., because we need to run on the Eclipse Jenkins infrastructure, because they have the signing keys that we need to sign those installers. Right. Also a couple of workflow files here that we use, for example, to push the IDE images to the GitHub container registry. There's no magic here, just look through the code and you will find it to be quite normal, right? So let's go back to the presentation. Nope. Right there. There we go. So what's the success of the whole thing? We had about 1,000 downloads per day initially when we did the GA release, and we have about sustained 2,000 new users per week right now. That's not the millions and millions that VS Code has, but it's early days, and we of course hope that the number will be greater next year. What we have noticed is that we have a big increase in actually useful bug reports, and that's just because if you have thousands of users, people will do things which you do not in your daily work. So the range of bug reports that we get has really increased. And we're also hearing the same from our adopters, that they're seeing less problems off the beaten path for the framework as well, not just in an IDE specific use case. Now let's do some comparisons, right? For example, if we compare Theia versus VS Code, what should you use? The first advantage of Theia, I would say, is it's fully open source, and 5% of VS Code users seem to care about that, as we've seen before. But there are also some features which you have in Theia, which is simply not in VS Code. The secondary windows, for example, that you can drag out the chat windows for the AI. The Theia AI framework, I think, is a big one, but also Open Collab, that you can run your own collaboration server. You don't have to go through Microsoft. You can have multiple VSX registries. For example, if you have a big company and you make your own in-house VS Code extensions, you can publish those to an internal registry, and you don't have to put them on the marketplace, and people can just either download them from there, but they can also access the public OpenVSX marketplace. Sorry. A biggie for me is openness, because we're not limited by business interests to the Microsoft ecosystem, right? For example, there is a service called ScanOSS, where that you can use for scanning code for copyright violations, or when it comes from question in the chat. You can basically send the code to that service, and they will tell you if that code is from an open source project. And if it's from an open source project, you will not want to use it in your proprietary code, because you'll get into IP trouble. And that's useful when you have code that is generated from an AI, because you never know where they come from. And I mean, Microsoft has such a checker too, but we're free to use whatever the best service on the market is. We're not bound to use our own stuff, because we don't have our own stuff, right? Last one is transparency. Everything is open source. You can look at everything. There's no telemetry we're sending somewhere where you don't know what they're doing with it. So I think that's a big plus. Then let's compare Theia to VS Codium. There are missing features like live share or Copilot in VS Codium, because many of the juicy new features are actually not implemented as VS Code source code. but they're implemented as extension. And often those extensions have restrictive or unclear licensing. For example, LiveShare, the way I read the licenses out for VS Codium, and Copilot just redirects you to a GitHub page or a page on the GitHub website, where for me it's pretty unclear whether you can use the service with non-Microsoft products or not. Second, community. What happens if you have a problem with VS Codium, right? There's no real community programming for VS Code. They're doing a rebuild of VS Code with the non-open source bits removed. The third one is VS Codium is just like VS Code. And as we've seen before, there are some advantages to using Theia feature-wise, and you just won't get those with VS Codium either. And the last one is, but why? If you care about open source so much that you're not using VS Code, why would you use something based on VS Code when there's a valuable or a valid alternative, right? Now let me quickly do an excursion into financing models, because some friend was asking me how we actually get financing for doing Eclipse Theia. And there are a couple of different ways you can finance an IDE, right? The first one is a direct financing. IntelliJ does that. You give them money, they give you an IDE, and if you want updates, you give them more money. It's quid pro quo, very simple. The second one is an indirect financing. That's what VS Code and also Eclipse in a way does, is where they give you an IDE, but they want to sell you something else. So for example, with VS Code, it would be Gitpod licenses, you give them $20 a month or things like that. The third one is a competitive financing, which means, and I think this was the case originally for Eclipse, if somebody else is making good money or taking lots of advantages by having good developer tools, you want to diminish their advantage by providing something that is competitive to that offering. And the last one is the financing model that Theia uses, and it's basically a cost sharing model. So if you need a special purpose IDE, right, you have a buy versus build dilemma. Because if you want to build a whole IDE from scratch, that's going to be very, very expensive. So if you need that, it's much cheaper to actually share the cost for the common services around that with other companies, right? So you pay someone like me or Typefox or Eclipse Source to maintain that framework, and you get most of your IDE for a tenth of the cost of building it yourself. So with that, we come, if we want, to a call to action, right? So how can you help Theia IDE? And the first one is to use it. We always like good download stats. Do report issues about it, because we have our own workflows, and we find issues in those workflows, but yours might be completely different. For example, we don't really do Java with the IDE. So if you do Java with the IDE, that's really helpful for us. Use a large amount of workflows and also extensions with Theia IDE. If you have the opportunity, write about it. We often find that Theia is not as known as it might be. So if you have a blog or if you are a journalist, write about Theia. It's an interesting topic, and we like to talk about it. If you're if you are familiar with packaging Theia for various Linux distributions, that's a place where we could use help. So if you're a maintainer or want to be one, contact us. We're happy. And if you are a company and you're doing something with Theia and you have a lot of budget, consider sponsoring some Theia development, because you cannot capture the value if nobody creates the value in the first place. So it's a good idea and good business practice to put some of your budget into the framework. And last but not least, if you are a programmer and you like the kind of programming, consider contributing to the project itself. Fix a bug, file a bug, fix a bug. We're always happy to look at PRs. So a bit about the future. What's up with Theia IDE next year? I think we want to deliver more unique features like the ones you've seen. Theia AI, secondary windows. Callout will get better. One I'm really keen about is backend plugins. We haven't really figured out what to do with it, but except in special cases. But I think this might be an opportunity to refactor some of the stuff we do in the back end. Of course, we want to have even better quality, and that depends again on you. Send us those bug reports. We can fix what we don't know about. The last 2 points are more personal for me. So my goal would be to replace VS Codium as the open source or #1 open source VS Code alternative. And in the long range, one thing that would be really, really cool if there was, instead of, we're using some of the code from VS Code, if there was kind of an open source project in the middle. I adopted Open Monaco here. That's just me. And if that would be a collaborative effort and everybody could build their own products with their own strengths and weaknesses around that open core. Right. I was a bit faster than I thought or when I was practicing, so there's time for questions.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Thomas. So there is a question from Matthew Kuzman. So Thomas, you mentioned that 5% of VS Code users care about FOSS. Could maybe 2.5% care about FOSS and 2.5% care about telemetry?
That's entirely possible. Although, I don't know. I prefer to think that 5% care about open source, because usually the 5% that care about open source software are also the 5% that care about telemetry, right?
Well, Matthew's laughing. He put the emoji of laughing. So that's great. Is there any other questions from the audience? He commented, yes, Thomas, 5% for both. Amazing. Well, thank you again so much.